My name is Rosetta Kite. I'm 22 years old. On my graduation day, my twin brother walked up behind me, ripped the cap off my head, and threw it on the ground. "Know your place," he said. My mother nodded like he'd done something kind. "Don't embarrass us, Rosetta." I kept calm, picked up the cap, brushed off the dust, and walked to the back row alone. They sat together in the front, where the families of important people sit. Then the dean stepped to the podium and announced one name. My brother froze. My mother gripped the arm of her chair, her face going white. For 22 years they decided who I was. They never once asked what I'd been building. Before I go any further, if this story is already sitting heavy in your chest, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps stories like this find the people who need them. And tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city and the time it is right now in the comments. I read them. I'm Rosetta. This is the story of the family that decided I was the lesser twin before I could even talk. And what happened the day a stranger with a microphone said my name out loud. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a house where one child got the trophies and the other got the silence. We were born 11 minutes apart. Nathan first, me second. I used to think that was the whole story. 11 minutes. That somewhere in those 11 minutes, my mother decided which of us mattered. Our father died when we were babies. I don't remember him. Neither does Nathan. Growing up, we had one photograph of him in the hallway, and my mother walked past it the way you walk past a light switch. He was a fact, not a memory. When I asked about him, she'd say, "He's gone, Rosetta. Let's not dig things up." So I stopped asking. That was the first thing I learned to stop doing. Our house was small, in a town outside Columbus where everyone knew everyone, and reputation was the only currency that didn't run out. My mother, Diane, managed the front office of a dental clinic. She wore her name like armor. The Kites were respectable. The Kites did not make scenes. The Kites, above all, did not embarrass each other in front of the neighbors. There were two kinds of children in our house. There was Nathan, and there was me. Nathan was the gifted one. That was decided early, and once it was decided, it became true the way things become true when an adult keeps saying them. He brought home a B, and my mother framed it as a triumph over difficult teachers. I brought home an A, and she asked who I'd copied from. His side of the hallway had a shelf. By the time we were 12, that shelf held a row of trophies: soccer participation, a spelling bee runner-up, a science fair ribbon. My mother dusted them on Sundays. My side of the hallway was a blank wall. I asked once if I could hang up a certificate I'd won for a math competition. She looked at it, then at the wall, and said, "Let's not crowd things." The certificate went in a drawer. I knew where it was. I always knew where everything was. That was the thing about me. I kept things. Receipts, papers, report cards, notes. Not because I planned anything. Back then, I just liked knowing that somewhere, in writing, the truth existed even if no one read it. There's a particular feeling that comes from being the child who is loved less. It isn't loud. It doesn't bruise. It's quieter than that. It's the second helping that goes to your brother. It's the way your name comes second when she's tired. It's learning, very young, that if you want something, the safest way to get it is to need it less than he does. By the time I was 10, I had stopped needing things out loud. I'll give you one example, because it's the one that taught me the rule. When we were 9, my mother took us school shopping. Nathan needed everything: new shoes, a backpack, a jacket, because Nathan was growing so fast. I needed shoes too. Mine had a hole I'd been hiding with a folded sock. At the store, my mother filled a cart for Nathan and then turned to me and said, "You can make yours last another season, can't you? You're good at that." You're good at that. At making do. At needing less. She'd turned my survival into a compliment so she'd never have to feel the cost of it. And I, 9 years old, said yes, because I'd already learned that the child who needs less is the child who causes less trouble. And causing less trouble was the closest thing to love I knew how to earn. I wore the shoes with the hole until spring. I never mentioned it again. My grandmother saw it. Grandma Ruth, my mother's mother, lived 2 towns over, and she was the only adult who looked at me like I was a person and not a problem. She'd take my hand at family dinners and say, "You're a deep one, Rosetta. Still water." My mother hated when she said that. I never understood why back then. I understand now. There was a night, I think I was 8, when I overheard them in the kitchen. Grandma Ruth said something low. My mother answered sharp, "Don't compare them. It isn't fair to Nathan." Not fair to Nathan, to compare us, as if the comparison was the cruelty, and not the result. I went back to bed. I didn't cry. I lay there and I thought, very calmly, the way a child shouldn't have to. I am on my own here. And somehow that was easier than hoping. What none of us knew that night, what my mother had spent years making sure no one knew, was that our father hadn't left us with nothing. He'd left something with my name on it. It just took me 18 years to find it. Let me tell you about the science fair. I was 11. I'd spent 2 months on a project about water filtration, testing which household materials cleaned dirty water best. I kept a notebook. I tested everything twice. I was 11 and I already understood that you don't get to claim a result you can't repeat. Nathan signed up too. He decided to do his the night before. A baking soda volcano, the kind you find on the first page of any search. The morning of the fair, my display board was gone. I'd left it by the front door. I came down and it wasn't there. I searched the whole house. My mother stood in the kitchen with her coffee and said she hadn't seen it. Nathan was already in the car. We were late. We had to go. I rode to the school with no project and a stomach full of something cold and heavy. When we got there, Nathan's volcano was set up on his table, and next to it, leaning against his chair, was my display board. My filtration project, my notebook, my handwriting, with his name taped over mine. I stood there and looked at it. Nathan wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother put her hand on his shoulder and said, to the teacher walking by, "He works so hard. He gets it from his father." I didn't say anything. What would I have said? That an 11-year-old's word against the family story would win? I'd already learned that math. So I stood at an empty table for 3 hours while parents walked past and asked me where my project was. Nathan got a ribbon. It went on the shelf. That night, I took my notebook back. The real one, with all the data in my handwriting that no tape could cover. And I put it in the drawer with the math certificate. I remember thinking, very clearly, I will never hand them anything I'm not willing to lose. That was the rule that ran the rest of my life. Here's the part that took me longer to understand. The money. Every year, around tax time, my mother would sit at the kitchen table with a folder of papers and talk about the family's future. There was money set aside, she said, for our education, for when we were older. She made it sound like a sacrifice she was making, drop by drop, out of her office manager's salary. And every year, somehow, that future arrived for Nathan. Nathan got the tutor when he was failing pre-algebra. Nathan got the SAT prep course, the expensive one with the guarantee. Nathan got the laptop for school, the one he used for video games. When Nathan wanted to try a summer enrichment program, the money was there. When I asked about a coding camp the summer I turned 15, $80, a community center, 2 weeks. My mother told me money was tight and I should think about getting a job. So I got a job. I was 15. I bagged groceries on weekends. I told myself the math was simple. Nathan needed more help, so Nathan got more help. I was capable, so I could fend for myself. That's the story I told myself for years, because the alternative, that they were spending something on him that should have been shared, was a thing I had no proof of yet. Notice that. No proof yet. There was a parent-teacher night the year I was 14. My algebra teacher, Mr. Dolan, had asked to speak to my mother specifically. I remember being nervous in a hopeful way, the kind of hope I'd mostly trained out of myself. Maybe this would be the night. Mr. Dolan told my mother I was the strongest math student he'd had in a decade. He said he wanted to move me into an accelerated track that I could test out of 2 years of material, that there were programs, real ones, scholarships attached, for students like me. My mother listened with a polite smile, and then she said, "That's very kind, but Rosetta tends to overreach. We don't want to set her up to fail. Nathan's the academic one. We're keeping our expectations realistic." Realistic. She said it to a teacher who just told her I was exceptional. Mr. Dolan looked at me. I was standing right there, and I watched him decide it wasn't his place to fight a mother in her own child's hallway. He gave me a small, sorry nod. The accelerated track quietly never happened. On the drive home, my mother said, "Don't let teachers fill your head, Rosetta. They don't know you like family does." She was right about one thing. They didn't know me like family did. They thought I was capable. By the time I was 16, I'd stopped showing them my report cards, stopped mentioning when I made the honor roll, stopped bringing home anything they could ignore or take. When a teacher mailed an award letter to the house, I learned to get to the mail first. If the truth lived anywhere safe, it would have to live with me. So I stopped telling them anything at all. If your own family had quietly decided one child was worth investing in and the other wasn't, would you have kept trying to earn it? Or would you have stopped the way I did? Tell me below. I genuinely want to know. I left for college the same week Nathan did. Same university, Brant, a big state school 3 hours from home, the kind with a stadium and 40,000 students and enough anonymity to disappear into. We didn't ride together. He went with my mother, his car packed to the roof, my mother fussing over which dorm had the better view. I took a bus. I had 2 duffel bags and a box of books I'd bought used. I picked Brant for one reason that had nothing to do with Nathan. It had one of the strongest biomedical engineering programs in the state, and it gave me a partial academic scholarship the day I applied. I didn't tell my family about the scholarship. By then, keeping good news to myself wasn't a wound anymore. It was a habit, a kind of safety. The first thing I did on campus, before I even unpacked, was walk to the post office 2 blocks off campus and rent a private mailbox. $11 a month. I had every official document, transcripts, award notices, financial aid letters, sent there instead of to my dorm or my mother's house. I told myself it was practical. Mail got lost in dorms. But the truth was simpler. I wanted a place the family story couldn't reach. A place where my record was just mine. That mailbox is going to matter. Remember it. College was the first time in my life that the work spoke louder than the story about me. Professors didn't know I was the difficult twin. They didn't know Nathan. They just saw what I turned in. And what I turned in was good. I worked 2 jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't. Mornings, I opened a coffee shop near campus, 5:30 to 9, then went to class. Evenings, I logged hours in the biomedical engineering lab as a paid research assistant, washing equipment at first, then running assays, then, by my 3rd year, co-authoring a paper with a postdoc. There's a kind of tired that scholarships don't cover. I knew the campus at hours most students never saw. The blue light before dawn when I unlocked the coffee shop, the fluorescent hum of the lab at midnight. My roommate, Cora, used to leave food outside my door on the nights I came in too late to cook. We barely talked, Cora and I, but she saw me. She'd say things like, "You're going to be somebody, Kite, and the rest of us are going to say we knew you." I thought she was being kind. I didn't believe it. Once, my 2nd year, I nearly quit. A pipe burst in my building and flooded my textbooks, and I sat on the wet floor at 2 in the morning and did the math, and realized I couldn't afford to replace them. I almost called my mother. I had the phone in my hand. Then I imagined her voice. I told you it was a lot, Rosetta. Not everyone's built for it. And I put the phone down. I borrowed the books from the library instead. I photocopied the chapters I needed, page by page, on a machine in the basement for hours. I never called. That muscle had atrophied years ago. My mother thought I was struggling. The few times we spoke, she'd ask, in that voice, "Are you keeping up out there, Rosetta? It's a lot, college. Not everyone's built for it." She assumed I was barely holding on. I let her assume it. Correcting her had never once worked. Meanwhile, Nathan's tuition got paid. All of it. He'd chosen business, a softer major he called it, for networking. His housing, his meal plan, his fees. Handled. My mother told relatives she was supporting the kids through school. Singular support, in practice. I was the kid she forgot to mention. The professor who changed everything was Eleanor Caldwell. Dr. Caldwell taught biomechanics and ran the lab where I worked. She was precise to the point of severity, the kind of professor who'd hand back a report with a single red question mark next to a number and expect you to understand exactly what you'd done wrong. Most students were afraid of her. I wasn't. I'd grown up reading silence. Her silences were honest. One night, late, I was alone in the lab finishing a dataset. She came in for something she'd forgotten and found me there. "You're here a lot," she said. "It's quiet." She looked at me for a moment. "Your numbers are the cleanest in the cohort. You know that?" I didn't know what to say. No one had ever told me my work was the best at anything. I'd never let them. "I keep good records," I said. She almost smiled. "Keep it up, Kite. People who keep good records tend to be standing when the dust settles." I didn't know how right she'd be. For 3 years, that was my life. Coffee at dawn, class, lab at night, a mailbox full of letters no one else read. And slowly, without telling a soul, I climbed to the top of my class. Then, in the fall of my senior year, a letter arrived at the family house instead of my mailbox. A bank letter. My mother opened it because she opened everything. And when I came home for a weekend in October, it was sitting on the counter, and one phrase on it stopped me cold. Trust disbursement. Until that letter, I thought my father had left us nothing. The letter was an account statement. My mother had shoved it under a stack of coupons, but the envelope was open and the top line was visible. A bank I didn't recognize, an account number, and the words, "Trust disbursement. Quarterly." I didn't touch it. I'd learned long ago not to let anyone see me looking, but I memorized the bank's name before she came back into the kitchen and swept the mail into a drawer. "Snooping?" she said. "Getting coffee." That was the whole conversation. But something had shifted in me, quiet and final, like a key turning. A trust. Disbursing money. Quarterly. For years, maybe. I drove back to campus and I did what I do. I looked things up, carefully, methodically. The way I'd tested water filters at 11. It turned out you can learn a great deal from public records if you know how to read them. My father, Daniel Kite, had died when Nathan and I were infants. I'd always been told he left us nothing, that he'd been irresponsible, in my mother's words, that we'd been lucky to keep the house. But a man who leaves nothing doesn't generate a quarterly trust disbursement 2 decades after his death. I called my grandmother. Grandma Ruth was 81 by then, sharp as ever, living in the same house 2 towns from where I grew up. I drove out on a Sunday. I didn't tell my mother. We sat in her kitchen with tea, and I asked her, plainly, "Grandma, did Dad leave us money?" She went still. Her hands settled around her cup. And then she said the thing that rearranged my entire childhood. "He left you everything he had, sweetheart. Both of you. He set it up before he died, when he knew he was sick. He was so proud he'd managed it." She looked at the table. "Your mother asked me never to talk about it." I kept my voice even. What was it? A trust. For your education, the both of you. And something else. A fund. He was a tinkerer, your father. An engineer, like you. She smiled, sad. He set up a little scholarship in his name, through some program. Said it was for whichever of his children reached the furthest. He used that word. Reached. He wanted it to mean something to earn it. I sat there and felt the floor of my life tilt. My father had been an engineer. Like me. No one had ever told me that. My mother had let me grow up thinking I came from nowhere, that my mind was a fluke, when in fact I'd inherited it. Grandma, I said, where did the money go? The education money. She wouldn't look at me. That was answer enough. Diane's the trustee, she said finally. She controls it until you're both grown. I always assumed she split it fair. She reached for my hand. Did she not, Rosetta? Did she not split it fair? I thought of Nathan's tutors, his SAT course, his paid tuition, his handled fees. I thought of my 2 jobs and my $11 mailbox and the coding camp I couldn't have for $80. No, I said. She didn't. Grandma Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she got up, slow on her hip, and went to a closet in the hall. She came back with a shoebox, the cardboard soft with age, and set it on the table between us. Your mother told me to throw these out years ago, she said. I never did. Inside were photographs. My father, young, in a garage that he'd turned into a workshop, holding a circuit board up to the light. My father with grease on his hands and a grin, standing next to something he'd built that I couldn't identify. My father holding 2 infants, one in each arm, looking down at us like we were the best things he'd ever made. I'd seen exactly 1 photo of him my whole life. Here were 40. He'd talk to you both in that workshop, Grandma Ruth said. Before he got too sick, he'd hold you up to whatever he was building and explain it like you understood. Diane said it was morbid, keeping these. I think she just didn't want to remember he'd been happy. She touched one with a fingertip. He'd have known you, Rosetta. The minute you picked up a wrench, he'd have known exactly whose kid you were. I took the photographs. I drove home with a man I'd never met sitting in the passenger seat of my memory. I didn't rage. I didn't cry in her kitchen. I held my grandmother's hand, and I felt something cold and clear settle over me. The feeling I imagine a surgeon has before the first cut. Not anger. Focus. There was a trust. My father had built it for both of us. My mother had drained it toward Nathan and let me believe I came from nothing. And there was a fund. A scholarship in my father's name, meant for whichever child reached the furthest. I drove back to campus that night and I started building a file. Not out of revenge. I want to be honest about that. I built it because for 21 years the truth about me had lived only in my own memory. Dismissible, deniable. I was done with that. I wanted it in writing, where no one could tape their name over mine. The first night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my dorm bed with the shoebox of my father's photographs spread across the blanket, and I tried to do the thing children of erased parents do. I tried to build a person out of fragments. The grease on his hands, the circuit board, the way Grandma Ruth said reached. The $200 marked books. I kept coming back to that word. Reached. He'd set up a fund and made it a contest, not out of cruelty, but because he understood something my mother never had. That the quiet child, the one who needs less and asks for nothing, is not the child who matters least. Sometimes she's the one reaching the farthest, in the dark, where no one thinks to look. He'd built me a door before I could walk, and my mother had spent 22 years standing in front of it so I'd never see it was there. I wasn't going to bring her down for that. I was just going to walk through the door, loudly enough that everyone would see which child found it. People think gathering evidence is dramatic. It isn't. It's patient and boring, and it lives in spreadsheets. I started with what I could legally get. As a beneficiary of a trust, I had the right to an accounting. I didn't go in swinging. I went to the campus legal aid clinic, a free service for students, and a third-year law student walked me through it. I learned the word I'd need for the rest of this story. Fiduciary. The law student who explained it to me was named Wendell, a tired third year who'd seen 100 family messes and treated mine like it deserved care anyway. He drew a diagram on a legal pad. A box for the trust. 2 lines coming out of it. One for me, one for Nathan. A circle around my mother labeled trustee. She doesn't own this money, Wendell said, tapping the box. She holds it. For both of you. The second she spends your half on him, she's broken a duty the law takes seriously. He looked up. Do you have access to the accounting? Not yet. You're a beneficiary. You can demand it in writing. She has to produce it. He paused. Most people in your position never ask. They assume they have to prove the unfairness from memory, and memory doesn't hold up. He slid the pad toward me. Numbers hold up. Get the numbers. A trustee has a fiduciary duty. It means she's legally bound to act in the beneficiary's best interest. Both of them, equally, unless the document says otherwise. Spending one child's share on the other isn't generosity. It's a breach. It can be undone. It can be repaid. I requested a formal accounting of the trust. I had the right, and I exercised it, in writing, with a date stamp. That was the first document in my file. It took 6 weeks to arrive. When it did, I read it at the little table in my dorm with a cup of cold coffee, and I made a spreadsheet, line by line. The numbers told a story even my mother couldn't reframe. Over 14 years, the trust had paid out steadily. SAT prep. A real charge, paid from the trust. Tutoring, paid from the trust. A summer enrichment program, the one Nathan went to. Tuition payments to Brant. Tens of thousands, all routed to Nathan's student account. Nathan's housing. Nathan's fees. For me, the trust showed exactly one disbursement, a single payment, the year we turned 18, for $200. The memo line said books, $200. Against everything Nathan had received. I sat with that for a long time. Then I printed it, dated it, and added it to the file. Next, I needed my own record. The thing I'd been quietly building for 3 years without realizing it would matter. I went to my mailbox, the $11 one, the one I told you to remember, and I emptied it onto my desk. Every transcript, every semester, every grade. 3 years of a GPA that had never dropped below the top of my class. 2 award letters I'd quietly received and quietly filed. The acceptance to the honors thesis program. The paper I'd co-authored, with my name on it. The complete, dated, documented record of a person my family had decided was barely keeping up. And then there was the fund. My father's scholarship. I asked Dr. Caldwell about it, carefully, one evening in the lab. I didn't tell her the whole story. I just asked if she'd heard of a Memorial Research Fellowship at the university. I gave the name. The Daniel Kite Memorial Research Fellowship. She set down the pipette she was holding. Kite, she said slowly. That's your name. It was my father's. She looked at me for a long moment. Dr. Caldwell, who never said more than the facts required. I'm on that committee, she said. I've been on it for years. We award it to one graduating researcher annually. I never connected the name. She studied me. Rosetta. Do you understand what you're in the running for? No, I said honestly. The committee already knows who this year's recipient is, she said. The decision's been made. It's announced at commencement. She paused. I can't tell you the name, but I can tell you to be there, and I can tell you to bring your family. I almost laughed. My family doesn't come to things for me. She looked at me the way Grandma Ruth used to. Then maybe it's time they had a reason to. I had the trust accounting. I had my full academic record. I had a fund in my father's name. I had Grandma Ruth, who would tell the truth if asked. I had all of it. There was just one piece left, and it walked into my lap, because Nathan could never keep his mouth shut. I want to be clear about something. I never went looking for dirt on my brother. I had enough. The trust, my record, the fund, that was a complete picture. I didn't need more. But the last piece found me anyway, the way the truth tends to when you've stopped hiding from it. It was a Thursday in February of senior year. I was in the lab early, alone, when a girl I knew slightly from the engineering building came in to drop off a sample. She was friends with someone in the business school. She didn't know Nathan was my brother. Different last names on her radar, different worlds. She just wanted to gossip. "Did you hear about the cheating thing?" she said. "Some senior in the business school got flagged. Whole capstone project. Bought off one of those essay sites. They opened a full integrity investigation. He's looking at not graduating." "What's his name?" I asked. Casual, washing a beaker. "Kite. Nathan Kite." I kept washing the beaker. I didn't change my face. I'd had 22 years of practice not changing my face. "That's a shame," I said. "I want to tell you I was sad." Some part of me was, but mostly I felt the strange calm of a pattern completing itself. Of course. The boy who taped his name over my science project at 11 had grown into a man who bought his final project at 22. The story my family told, Nathan the gifted one, Rosetta the struggler, had been backwards from the beginning. It just took the world a while to catch up to what I'd always known. I confirmed it carefully. Not by snooping. I want to be honest about how I knew. The university's integrity proceedings aren't public, and I didn't try to access anything I shouldn't. But over the following weeks, the signs were everywhere if you knew to look. Nathan stopped posting online. He came home for a weekend in March, jittery, checking his phone constantly, snapping at our mother when she asked about his big presentation, and my mother, who could not imagine her golden child doing wrong, told relatives he was stressed from how hard he's working. She actually said that. She blamed his stress on his work ethic, the same way she'd once said the science project proved his. I didn't tell anyone what I knew. I didn't gloat. I just understood, with total clarity, that whatever happened on graduation day, my brother was walking onto that field with his entire image balanced on a lie that the university had already caught. I added one line to my file. Not the investigation. I had no documents for that, and I wouldn't fake them. Just a dated note to myself. N flagged. Business capstone. Integrity hold. Confirmed by behavior plus multiple sources. February to March. There was a moment, around then, when Nathan called me. He never called. It was late, and his voice had the slur of someone 2 drinks past honest. "You hear anything?" he said. "About me, at school, people talking?" I could have lied easily. I chose a different kind of honesty. "What would they be saying, Nathan?" A long pause. "Nothing. Forget it. It's all a misunderstanding anyway. Some professor with a grudge." Another pause, and then, quieter, the closest he'd ever come to asking me for something. "You wouldn't say anything, right? If you knew something, we're family." We're family. He'd taped his name over mine at 11 and called it family. He'd ridden through college on money meant for both of us and called it family. And now, frightened, he reached for the word like a life raft. "I'm not the one you should be worried about," I said. And I meant it. I wasn't going to expose him. I didn't have to. He'd built the trap himself. He was just now feeling the edges of it in the dark. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat with the phone a moment, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. A kind of grief. Somewhere under the golden child was a scared person who'd been handed everything and taught how to keep none of it. My mother had ruined us both. She'd just done it in opposite directions. I closed the file. It was complete. The reveal would come whether I did anything or not. That was the part my family never understood about me. I didn't have to bring the building down. I just had to stop holding it up. I had it all. In April, 2 things happened in the same week, and I told no one about either. The first, an email from the registrar's office, sent to my mailbox address. Congratulations. Based on your cumulative academic record, you have been selected as valedictorian of your graduating class. There was a form to sign, confirming I'd deliver the commencement address. I read it 3 times. Then I sat at my little desk and I didn't move for a long while. Valedictorian. The highest GPA in a class of thousands. The student chosen to speak for everyone. Me, the difficult twin, the one who copied, the one who was barely keeping up, the one whose certificate didn't deserve wall space. I signed the form. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Nathan. I called my grandmother. "Oh, Rosetta," Grandma Ruth said, and her voice broke. "Your father." "Oh, your father would have—" She couldn't finish. I held the phone and listened to her cry, and I let myself feel it for the first time. Not triumph. Something quieter and older than that. Recognition. The second thing came 2 days later. A letter, formal, from the fellowship committee, signed by the chair and co-signed by Dr. Eleanor Caldwell. I was the recipient of the Daniel Kite Memorial Research Fellowship. Full funding for graduate study. My father's name. Awarded, the letter said, to the graduating researcher who best embodies the founder's vision of reaching beyond expectation. Reaching. The word my father used. The word my grandmother remembered. He'd built it for whichever of his children reached the furthest. And after 22 years, across a distance he never got to see, his hand had landed on my shoulder. I want to tell you about the letter inside the letter. Folded into the fellowship packet was a copy of a note my father had written when he established the fund. The committee included it for every recipient, the founder's original statement of purpose. I'd never seen his handwriting before. My mother had erased him so completely that I didn't know the shape of his letters. It was short. It said the fund was for a child who kept going when no one was watching. Who did the work for the work's sake? Who reached? He didn't know which of us it would be. He'd died when we were too small to show him anything. He just built a door and trusted that the right child would find it. I found it, Dad. I brought the photographs to the lab the next week. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted him somewhere I spent my real life. Dr. Caldwell came in while I had one propped against my monitor, the one of him holding the circuit board to the light. She stopped, looked at it, looked at me. "That's your father," she said. It wasn't a question. "You can tell? You hold a multimeter exactly the way he's holding that board." She almost smiled. Same impatience to see if the thing works. She pulled a stool over and sat, which she never did. I didn't know him, but I know his fund. Every year his statement of purpose comes across the committee table, and every year I think the same thing. Whoever wrote this actually believed the quiet ones were worth funding. She nodded at the photo. He'd be unbearable right now, if he could see this. The good kind of unbearable. I sat with my father's words in my hands, and I made a decision. I would not tell my family any of it. Not the valedictorian, not the fellowship, not the trust accounting sitting in my file, not the fund with his name on it. I would simply show up to my own graduation, sit where they put me, and let the dust settle exactly where it fell. Because here's what they didn't know. They didn't know any of it. The week before commencement, my mother called me more than she had all year. Not about me. About Nathan. She was planning a celebration. A big dinner the night before, relatives driving in, a banner she'd ordered. "We have to make it special," she said. Your brothers worked so hard for this. She talked for 10 minutes about Nathan's future, his leadership potential, the job he was sure to land. She did not ask me a single question about myself. Not one. At the very end, almost as an afterthought, she said, "You're coming, I assume, to the ceremony. Just, Rosetta, don't make it about you that day, all right? It's a big day for the family. Don't make it about you." I almost admired the symmetry of it. "I'll be there," I said. The rehearsal dinner was at a chain restaurant with a private room. I went. I sat at the end of the table, the way I always did, the seat nobody fights for. My mother had hung the banner. "Congratulations, Nathan. Just Nathan." We were both graduating, both kites. The banner had one name. Nathan held court. He was rattled underneath. I could see it, the phone checking, the too loud laugh. But he performed. He talked about offers he was weighing. My mother glowed. Relatives I barely knew toasted him. A great-aunt turned to me, kindly, and asked what I was studying. Before I could answer, my mother said, "Rosetta did one of those science things. Engineering, I think. She's been very independent." She made independent sound like a diagnosis. Then she steered the table back to Nathan. The great-aunt, her name was Lorraine, she'd driven 6 hours, wasn't quite done with me. "Engineering," she said, leaning past my mother. "What kind?" "Biomedical," I said. "That's the hard one, isn't it? My neighbor's boy washed out of that in a semester." She studied me with new interest. "You must be sharp." "She gets by," my mother cut in, smiling, and physically turned her shoulder so Lorraine had to face Nathan again. "Now, Nathan's the one with the offers. Tell her about the offers, sweetheart." I watched my mother insert her own body between me and a single moment of being seen. 22 years, and she'd never gotten tired of it. There was almost something impressive in the consistency. I let it happen. I had a folder in my bag. I'd brought it without quite knowing why. The trust accounting, my transcripts, copies of both letters. Not to use, just to have. After 22 years, I didn't go anywhere important without the truth in writing. Grandma Ruth was the only one who looked at me. Across the table, while the toasts went on, she caught my eye and held it. She knew. She gave the smallest nod. "Tomorrow." I nodded back. Nathan, flushed and loud, lifted his glass for one more toast and looked down the table at me. "To my sister," he said, with a grin that wasn't kind. "Who came along for the ride?" Laughter, my mother's loudest of all. I lifted my water, said nothing, smiled. He thought he was the main character. He thought tomorrow was his coronation. He had no idea he was walking onto that field with a hold on his degree and a lie about to come due in front of 4,000 people. I went back to my dorm. I laid out my clothes for the morning. I set the folder on top of my bag, and I slept better than I had in years. The morning came clear and bright. I drove to the stadium with the truth in my bag and a speech in my pocket that no one knew I'd been chosen to give. I was walking in knowing everything, and they were walking in knowing nothing at all. The stadium held a little over 4,000 people. Graduates on the field in folding chairs, families packed into the stands, a stage at the front with a podium, the university seal, a row of seats for the deans and the platform party. I'll tell you exactly how it happened, because I've replayed it enough times to get it right. We lined up by college to process in. The graduates wore the same gown, but valedictorians wore an extra cord and a medallion, and a marshal had pulled me aside at check-in to seat me in the front section with the honor graduates and the platform party. I hadn't told my family I'd be seated up front. I hadn't told them anything. My mother and Nathan found me in the staging area before the procession. Nathan was in his gown, phone in his hand, jaw tight. My mother was scanning the crowd for relatives, narrating where everyone would sit. and Nathan saw the cord around my neck. The medallion. I watched him register it. I watched him not understand it, and then decide it didn't matter, because in his world it couldn't mean what it meant. He stepped close. "What's this?" He flicked the medallion with one finger. "It's mine," I said. "You probably signed up for some participation thing." He laughed, but it was thin. "God, you always have to have a little something, don't you?" Then he reached up, took the cap off my head, and dropped it on the ground. "Know your place?" he said. My mother turned, saw the cap on the ground, saw my bare head, and her face didn't fill with concern. It filled with embarrassment. At me. "Rosetta," she hissed. "Don't embarrass us. Pick that up and stop drawing attention." 4,000 people were filing in around us. A few had turned to look. I bent down. I picked up the cap. I brushed the dust off it, the same way I'd brushed the dust off everything they'd ever thrown down in front of me. I put it back on my head, over the cord and the medallion they couldn't read. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't run. "I'll see you after," I said, and I walked to my seat in the front section, alone, while they went to find theirs in the family stands. From where I sat, I could see them. My mother, smoothing her dress. Nathan, scrolling his phone, performing ease. A woman 2 seats down from me, another honor graduate, a stranger, leaned over. "Was that your family?" She'd seen the cap, the whole thing. "Yes." She didn't know what to say to that. Most people don't. "I'm sorry," she settled on. "Don't be," I said. "It's the most honest thing they've done in years." She laughed, startled, then caught herself. I meant it, though. There's a strange relief in cruelty that finally happens in daylight. For 22 years, they'd done it in kitchens and cars, where I could be told later that I'd imagined it, that I was too sensitive, that it hadn't happened the way I remembered. But 4,000 people had just watched my brother throw my cap on the ground. That one, at least, I'd never have to argue about. The ceremony began. The provost spoke. A trustee spoke. The minutes crawled, the sun climbed, and I sat very still with my hands folded, the way I'd sat at an empty science fair table 11 years before. I thought about the speech in my pocket. I'd rewritten it 11 times. I'd taken out every line that even gestured at them, because the work had never been about them, and I wasn't going to let it start now. What was left was about a door, and a father, and reaching. Then Dean Theodore Brennan stepped to the podium. "It is my honor," he said, "to recognize this year's valedictorian, the student with the highest academic standing in the entire graduating class, and our commencement speaker." I felt the whole stadium lean in. 4,000 people, waiting for a name. Across the field, in the family stands, my mother sat up straighter, the way you do when something good is about to happen to someone else, and you want to be seen approving of it. The dean looked down at the card. "Not over," I thought. "It's just starting." "Our valedictorian," Dean Brennan said, "graduating at the top of her class in biomedical engineering, Rosetta Kite." For 1 full second, there was nothing. Then applause, rolling across the stadium, the ordinary applause of 4,000 strangers for a name that meant nothing to them. But in the family stands, there was no applause. There was my mother, half risen, her hand gripping the arm of her chair, her face draining of color. There was Nathan, frozen, his phone still in his hand, his mouth slightly open. I stood. I walked to the stage. I climbed the steps, and the dean shook my hand, and I stepped to the podium in front of 4,000 people with a folder I didn't need yet, and a truth I'd kept for 22 years. I'll tell you what happened in the exact order it happened, because the order is the whole point. First came the lie. It came from the stands, loud enough to carry, because Nathan had never in his life been able to sit quietly while attention landed on me. "That's wrong!" he shouted, standing now. There's a mistake. That's not. He turned to the people around him, performing, the way he always performed. She's not even our family, she barely passed. This is a mix-up. A ripple went through the crowd. The dean glanced toward the stands. That was step 1. The lie, told in public, the way it had always been told in private. She barely passed. There's a mistake. She doesn't belong here. He'd just said it to 4,000 people instead of to a kitchen. I didn't rush. I leaned to the microphone, and I kept my voice level, the way Dr. Caldwell kept hers. My name is Rosetta Kite, I said. I'm graduating today at the top of this class. I have my transcripts here if anyone doubts it. That was the first evidence. I lifted the folder. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The simple fact that I had it, that I'd carried it, that I would say here and not trust me, it changed the air. She's lying. My mother was on her feet now beside Nathan. Rosetta, sit down. You're embarrassing this family. Her voice cracked on the last word. Embarrassing. The oldest weapon she had, and it had stopped working. Denial. Step 3. Right on time. I looked at her across the field. Then I said the thing I'd flown 22 years to say, and I said it gently, which made it worse for them. For 4 years I paid my own tuition. 2 jobs. I have the records. I let that sit. I also have the accounting of Dad's trust. The one that was supposed to be split between his 2 children. A pause. It paid for Nathan's tutors, Nathan's prep courses, Nathan's tuition. All of it. In 14 years it paid me exactly $200. The memo said books. Stronger evidence. Step 4. I heard it land. Not as a shout, but as a hush spreading outward. The particular silence of a crowd that has just understood it's watching something real. In the stands, people had started turning toward my mother and Nathan. Not all at once. In patches, the way a field turns when wind moves across it. A man near them leaned away slightly, the way you lean away from something you don't want to be associated with. 2 rows back, someone had their phone up, recording. Lorraine, my great-aunt who'd driven 6 hours, had both hands pressed to her mouth. She was looking at my mother like she'd never seen her before. And then Dean Brennan, who had no idea what he was walking into, delivered the final reveal himself. Before Ms. Kite gives her address, he said, reading from his card, I'm pleased to announce she is also this year's recipient of the Daniel Kite Memorial Research Fellowship, established by her late father, awarded to the graduating researcher who best embodies his vision of, and I quote, reaching beyond expectation. He said my father's name into the microphone, and it rolled across 4,000 people. And in the stands, my mother sat down like her legs had stopped working. Step 5. The final reveal. My father's name, the man she'd erased, spoken aloud over the daughter she'd buried, and attached to the very money she'd drained. Then came step 6. Silence. The whole stadium, quiet. Even Nathan had stopped. If you've ever had to let your work speak because the people who were supposed to be proud of you never would. I want to know what you built. Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading them tonight. And then Nathan did the thing that finished it. Step 7. He lost control, not because of anything I said, but because his own nature couldn't survive the silence. That's my scholarship, he screamed, climbing past people in the row, pointing at the stage. That's my father's money. That's supposed to be mine. They made a mistake. I'm the one who... I can't even graduate because of some stupid... He stopped. Too late. I can't even graduate. He'd said it himself, to 4,000 witnesses. The hold on his degree. The thing the university already knew. He'd shouted his own secret across the stadium because he could not bear to watch his sister be recognized for 1 single minute. And my mother, trying to save him, made it worse. Nathan, stop. she said. And then to the people staring at her. Desperate, reframing on instinct. We used the fund wisely. For the child with real promise. Any mother would. Step 8. Consequences begin. She'd just admitted out loud in front of hundreds of witnesses that she'd spent a trust meant for both children on one. The breach, stated as a defense. The dean stepped back to the microphone. Quietly to me, off mic, he said, "Take whatever time you need." I looked out at 4,000 people. I looked at my mother, sitting down, and my brother, who had run out of words for the first time in his life. And I unfolded the speech I'd rewritten 11 times. I didn't mention them. Not once. I want you to understand that, because it's the part I'm proudest of. I had every receipt in the world in the folder on that podium, and I used exactly enough to be recognized and not one page more. The folder closed. I left it closed. I talked about reaching. About the work you do when no one is watching, and no one is keeping score, and no one will ever know if you cut the corner. And how that work, the unwitnessed kind, is the only honest measure of a person. I talked about a father I never met who built a door out of the little he had and trusted that the right child would find it. I said that I'd found it. I said that doors like that are everywhere, built by people we've forgotten, and that the only way to honor them is to keep reaching even when the people closest to you are certain you'll fall. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying years ago, alone, where they'd taught me to do it. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. And then the stadium stood up. Not the family stands. I didn't look there, and it didn't matter. The graduates stood. The faculty stood. 4,000 strangers stood up for a name that, an hour ago, had meant nothing to any of them. Not for the family story. For the truth. The fallout was quiet, which is how real consequences usually arrive. Not with shouting. With letters. Nathan did not graduate that day. The integrity hold he'd announced to 4,000 people was real. The hearing concluded weeks later, and his degree was withheld pending completion of new work he'd have to actually do himself. The job he'd been weighing evaporated when the offer was rescinded. My mother received a different kind of letter. Once I had the trust accounting on record, the breach was no longer something I had to prove in a kitchen. As a trustee, she'd had a fiduciary duty to both of us. Through the legal aid clinic, I filed for a full accounting and restitution of my share. It wasn't revenge. It was math, finally done correctly. She is repaying what was spent. It will take her years. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it because the money was my father's, meant for me, and I was done letting people tape their names over mine. I see my grandmother. Grandma Ruth and I have tea most Sundays now, and she tells me about my father, the tinkerer, the engineer, the man who built a door for a child he'd never meet. I'm learning the shape of him, one Sunday at a time. I don't see my mother. I sent one letter after the restitution was filed. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, which was true, and that I wouldn't be coming home, which was also true. I told her that the door to a relationship wasn't locked, but that she'd have to walk through it as someone who could say my name without flinching. She hasn't tried. That tells me what I already knew. Nathan reached out once. A long text about how the family was falling apart, and it was my fault for making a scene. I read it twice. Then I wrote back 4 words. You threw the cap. I didn't hear from him again. The fellowship started in the fall. I'm in graduate school now, doing the work my father did, with his name funding the bench I work at every day. Some mornings I get to the lab before anyone else, and I think about Dr. Caldwell saying that people who keep good records tend to be standing when the dust settles. I kept good records. I'm standing. Cora was right, by the way. She tells people she knew me. I let her think she got the better end of the friendship, but she didn't. On the hard nights, she was the one who saw me when I was invisible to everyone whose actual job it was to look. I don't forget who fed me when I had nothing. That's a different kind of record, and I keep that one too. People ask if I wish my family had just loved me. Of course I do. Every scapegoated child does, for years longer than they should. But I stopped reaching for it the day I realized I could reach for something else instead. People also ask how I drew the boundary so cleanly. The truth is, I didn't slam a door. I just stopped pretending the room was warm. For most of my life, I'd contorted myself to earn a love that was never on offer. And the day I stopped contorting, the silence that came back wasn't loss. It was just the truth. Finally allowed to be quiet. You don't have to hate the people who failed you. You just have to stop auditioning for them. I still have the cap. It's on a shelf in my apartment, dusted off, the cord coiled beside it. My side of the hallway used to be a blank wall. It isn't anymore.